The church stood like a monument to ambition at the corner of Riverside and 10th, its white columns gleaming under the morning sun. Inside, the air smelled of polished wood and expensive perfume. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, and the carpet beneath the pews felt thick enough to swallow footsteps. This was not a place of humble worship. This was a temple of prosperity, where faith wore designer suits and drove luxury cars. Pastor Vincent Mercer stood at the pulpit, his smile practiced and wide, his voice carrying the kind of confidence that came from years of commanding attention. He was 42 years old, tall, with silver touching his temples in just the right way to suggest wisdom without age. His sermons were polished performances, each word measured, each pause calculated. He spoke of blessings and abundance, of God rewarding the faithful with earthly riches. The congregation loved him for it. They came every Sunday, checkbooks ready, eager to sow their seeds of prosperity. The offering time arrived like clockwork at 11:15, and the ushers moved through the rows with velvet-lined baskets. Bills rustled, checks were folded, and the sound of generosity filled the sanctuary. Vincent watched from his elevated position, nodding approvingly at the larger donations he could spot. 100 here, 500 there. One businessman in the third row dropped an envelope he knew contained at least 1,000. Vincent made a mental note to thank him personally after the service. Then he noticed her. She sat in the last row, almost hidden behind a marble pillar. An old woman, perhaps 75 or 80, wearing a faded blue dress that had seen better decades. Her hands were weathered, the kind that had worked hard for many years, and her shoes were scuffed at the toes. She clutched a small brown purse on her lap, holding it like it contained something precious. When the offering basket reached her, she opened the purse with trembling fingers and pulled out 2 crumpled dollar bills. Just 2. She placed them in the basket with a gentleness that suggested they meant the world to her. Vincent saw it. His eyes narrowed for just a moment, and then he smiled. But it was not a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who had just witnessed something amusing, something almost pathetic. He leaned toward his assistant pastor sitting to his right and whispered something. The younger man glanced back at the old woman and stifled a laugh. When the offering was complete and the baskets brought forward, Vincent stood again, his voice booming across the sanctuary. "Brothers and sisters," he began, "today we celebrate those who understand the principle of abundance. Those who give generously will receive generously. God loves a cheerful giver, yes, but he also honors those who give with faith, not fear, not pocket change, but real commitment." A few people in the congregation shifted uncomfortably. Others nodded in agreement. Vincent continued, his tone growing more animated. "I see some of you holding back, giving from your leftovers instead of your first fruits. Remember, you cannot outgive God, but you also cannot expect harvest when you plant only seeds of doubt." His gaze drifted, almost imperceptibly, toward the back row. The old woman sat perfectly still, her eyes closed, her lips moving in silent prayer. She did not seem to notice the veiled criticism, or perhaps she chose not to, but others noticed. Whispers spread through the pews like ripples in water. After the service ended, Vincent stood at the exit, shaking hands and accepting compliments. His wife Diane stood beside him, her smile as perfect as her makeup. She wore pearls and a cream-colored dress that cost more than some people made in a week. Together, they looked like the portrait of success, the living proof that God blessed those who followed the right path. The old woman shuffled toward the exit slowly, her small frame almost lost in the crowd. Vincent barely glanced at her as she passed. No handshake, no greeting. She was invisible to him, just another face in a sea of faces, and not a particularly important one. She paused for a moment at the door, looking back at the sanctuary as if memorizing it, then stepped out into the bright afternoon. What Vincent did not know, what he could not possibly have known, was that those $2 represented everything, absolutely everything. The old woman's name was Margaret Hines, though most people who remembered her at all called her Maggie. She lived in a narrow apartment on the east side of town, in a building where the elevator only worked half the time, and the hallways smelled of old cooking oil and regret. Her apartment was on the 4th floor, and she climbed the stairs slowly, one hand on the railing, pausing every few steps to catch her breath. Inside, the space was small but meticulously clean. A single bed with a hand-stitched quilt, A wooden table with 2 chairs, a kitchenette with a stove that clicked 3 times before the flame caught. On the wall hung a faded photograph of a young man in military uniform, his smile bright and confident. Beneath it, a folded flag in a triangle frame. Her son, Thomas, who had died in a war that felt both recent and ancient, depending on the day. Maggie had been a widow for 30 years. Her husband, Robert, had worked in the factories until his lungs gave out from the dust and the smoke. After he died, she raised Thomas alone, working as a seamstress, taking in alterations and repairs, her fingers flying over fabric late into the night. She never made much, but it was enough. Enough to keep the lights on, enough to put food on the table, enough to send Thomas to school with clean clothes and hope in his eyes. When Thomas died, something in her broke that never quite healed. The government sent her a check every month, a small pension barely enough to cover rent and utilities. She stretched every dollar until it screamed, bought day-old bread, drank her coffee black because milk was expensive, wore the same 3 dresses in rotation, but she went to church. Every Sunday, without fail, she went to church. Not Vincent Mercer's church, not at first. She had attended a small chapel across town, a place with wooden pews and a roof that leaked when it rained. The pastor there was an old man named Father Gregory, who spoke softly and knew everyone's name. He had baptized Thomas, had held her hand at Robert's funeral, had been a constant presence in her life. When Father Gregory died and the chapel closed, Maggie felt lost. For weeks she did not attend services anywhere. Then a neighbor mentioned the big church on Riverside, the one with the crystal chandeliers and the pastor who preached about prosperity. Maggie was skeptical, but she decided to try. Maybe God was there too, she thought. Maybe it did not matter how fancy the building was. So she went, week after week, sitting in the back, listening to Vincent Mercer talk about blessings and abundance. She did not understand all of it. The talk of investments and portfolios and sowing seeds felt foreign to her, but she listened and she prayed, and every Sunday she put whatever she could into the offering basket. This particular Sunday she had only $2 to her name. The rent was due in 3 days and she was short. Her pension check would not arrive until the following week. She had already sold most of what she owned over the years, piece by piece, to make ends meet. The television, the radio, the few pieces of jewelry Robert had given her, all gone. But there was one thing left, one last thing. On her dresser, in a small velvet box, sat a gold locket. It had belonged to her mother and her grandmother before that. Inside were 2 tiny photographs, one of Robert, one of Thomas, their faces barely visible in the faded sepia tones. She had worn that locket every day for as long as she could remember, the weight of it against her chest, a constant reminder that she was loved, that she had been part of something beautiful. On Saturday, the day before church, Maggie had walked to the pawn shop on 5th Street. The man behind the counter was young, with tattoos on his arms and a bored expression. He barely looked at her as she placed the locket on the glass counter. "How much?" she asked quietly. He picked it up, examined it with a jeweler's loupe, weighed it on a small scale. "It is gold, but not much of it, $20. Her heart sank. $20. For something that held her entire history. She thought about negotiating, but she knew it would not matter. This was not about value. This was about survival. She nodded. All right. He counted out the bills and she took them with shaking hands. As she walked out of the shop, she felt the absence of the locket like a missing limb. She went home, paid $15 toward her rent, bought a small bag of rice and a carton of eggs with the rest, and set aside $2 for the offering. Because even when she had nothing, she gave something. That was what Father Gregory had taught her. That giving was not about the amount. It was about the heart. Vincent Mercer did not think about the old woman again. Why would he? She was inconsequential, a forgettable face in a congregation of hundreds. He had more important things to occupy his mind. The church was planning a building expansion, a new wing that would house a state-of-the-art media center. The price tag was steep, $2 million, but Vincent was confident they could raise it. He had already secured commitments from several wealthy members, and the rest would come through targeted campaigns and special offerings. That evening, he sat in his home office, a spacious room with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a mahogany desk that cost more than Maggie's annual income. Diane brought him a glass of scotch, and he sipped it slowly, reviewing the day's offering totals on his computer. 15,000, $342. Not bad, but not great. He made a note to preach harder on generosity next week. His phone buzzed. A text from one of the deacons. "Pastor, we need to talk about the woman in the back row. Several people complained after service. They felt your comments were directed at her." Vincent frowned. He typed back quickly. "I did not mention anyone by name. I preached biblical principles. If someone felt convicted, that is between them and God." He set the phone down, irritated. People were too sensitive these days. Everything was an offense, every word scrutinized. He was not going to apologize for preaching the truth. But the complaints did not stop. Over the next few days, 3 more members reached out, expressing discomfort with how the old woman had been treated. One of them, a retired schoolteacher named Barbara, was particularly persistent. She called Vincent's office directly. "Pastor, I have been attending this church for 8 years, and I have never felt compelled to call you like this, but I must. That woman gave sacrificially, and you mocked her. Whether you realize it or not, that is what happened." Vincent kept his voice calm, measured. "Barbara, I appreciate your concern, but I think you are misinterpreting my words. I was speaking generally about the importance of generous giving. I would never single out an individual." She paused, then sighed. "I hope that is true, Pastor. I really do, but I know what I saw, and so did others." After she hung up, Vincent sat back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. He felt a flicker of something, guilt, maybe, or unease, but he pushed it down. He had done nothing wrong. He had preached truth. If people could not handle it, that was their problem, not his. But the unease lingered. On Wednesday evening, the church held a midweek service, a smaller gathering focused on prayer and Bible study. Vincent usually led these, but tonight he delegated it to his assistant pastor and stayed in his office catching up on administrative work. Around 8 o'clock, there was a knock on his door. "Come in," he called. The door opened, and Barbara entered, followed by 2 other women from the congregation. One was younger, perhaps in her 30s, with kind eyes and a nervous smile. The other was older, closer to Maggie's age, with silver hair and a stern expression. "Pastor, we need to speak with you," Barbara said. Vincent gestured to the chairs across from his desk. "Of course. What can I do for you?" The 3 women sat, and Barbara spoke first. "We came to talk to you about Margaret Hines, the older woman from Sunday." Vincent blinked. "I am not sure who you mean." "The woman in the back row," Barbara clarified. "The one who gave $2. "Ah," Vincent said, nodding slowly. "What about her?" The younger woman leaned forward. "Pastor, do you know her story?" "I cannot say that I do. Her name is Maggie. She is 78 years old. She is a widow. Her husband died from lung disease after working in the factories for 30 years. Her only son was killed in Afghanistan. She lives alone in a tiny apartment and survives on a pension that barely covers her rent. She has no family left. No one." Vincent shifted in his chair, his discomfort growing. "I am sorry to hear that, but I am not sure what this has to do with Sunday service." The older woman with silver hair spoke now, her voice sharp. "It has everything to do with it, Pastor. Do you know what she did to have those $2? Vincent said nothing. She sold her mother's locket, the only thing she had left of value, the only thing that connected her to her family. She sold it at a pawn shop for $20, paid her rent, bought food, and brought the rest to church. To this church, to give to God." The room fell silent. Vincent felt his face flush. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. Barbara leaned forward, her eyes glistening. "Pastor, that woman gave everything she had, and you laughed at her." "I did not laugh," Vincent protested weakly. "You dismissed her. You made her feel small. You preached about generosity while standing on a stage that cost more than her entire year's income. Do you see the problem?" Vincent looked down at his desk, his mind racing. He wanted to defend himself, to explain that he had not meant it that way, that his words had been taken out of context. But deep down, in a place he rarely visited, he knew they were right. "Where is she now?" he asked quietly. "At home, I assume," the younger woman said. "She does not drive. She takes the bus everywhere." Vincent nodded slowly. "Can you give me her address?" The 3 women exchanged glances. Barbara wrote it down on a slip of paper and handed it to him. "Please, Pastor, make this right." After they left, Vincent sat alone in his office for a long time. The building was quiet now, the midweek service over, the hallways empty. He stared at the address on the paper, feeling the weight of it in his hand. He thought about his sermon, about his words, about the way he had looked at Maggie without really seeing her. He thought about the locket. Finally, he stood, grabbed his coat and walked out to his car. The drive to Maggie's apartment took 20 minutes. Vincent had never been to this part of town before, and as he navigated the narrow streets, he felt increasingly out of place. His car, a sleek black sedan with leather seats and a sound system that cost more than some people's monthly rent, stood out among the older vehicles parked along the curbs. He found the building, a drab brick structure with a faded awning and a broken intercom. He parked and sat for a moment, his hands on the steering wheel, his heart pounding. What was he going to say? How could he possibly make this right? He climbed the stairs to the 4th floor, each step feeling heavier than the last. When he reached her door, he hesitated, then knocked softly. There was a long pause, then the sound of shuffling footsteps. The door opened a crack and Maggie's face appeared, her eyes widening in surprise. "Pastor Mercer," she said, her voice uncertain. "Hello, Mrs. Hines. May I come in?" She hesitated, then nodded, opening the door wider. Vincent stepped inside, and the contrast between this space and his own home hit him like a physical blow. The apartment was smaller than his office, the furniture worn, the walls bare except for the photograph of her son and the folded flag. Maggie gestured to one of the chairs at the table. "Please sit." Vincent sat and she lowered herself into the chair across from him, her hands folded in her lap. She looked nervous, confused, and he realized she had no idea why he was here. "Mrs. Hines," he began, his voice unsteady. "I came to apologize." She blinked. "Apologize? For what?" "For Sunday. For the way I spoke during the offering. I was told that my words hurt you, and I am deeply sorry." Maggie shook her head slowly. "Oh, Pastor, you do not need to apologize to me. I did not take offense." "But you should have," Vincent said, his throat tightening. "I was cruel. I was dismissive. And I did not even realize it until someone told me what you sacrificed to give those $2. Her face paled. "Who told you? Does it matter?" He leaned forward. "Mrs. Hines, I have spent years preaching about generosity, about faith, about giving, but I never understood what it really meant until tonight. You gave everything. Not out of obligation, not for recognition, but because you love God. And I mocked you for it." Tears welled in Maggie's eyes. "Pastor, I did not give to be seen. I gave because it was all I had to offer. Father Gregory used to say that God does not measure our gifts by their size, but by the sacrifice behind them. I wanted to honor that." Vincent felt his own eyes sting. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out an envelope. Inside was $5,000 in cash, money he had withdrawn from his personal account on the way over. He placed it on the table. "This is not enough. It could never be enough. But I want you to have it, and I want to help you get your locket back." Maggie stared at the envelope, her hands trembling. "Pastor, I cannot accept this." "Yes, you can, and you will." He paused, his voice breaking. "Mrs. Hines, you taught me something tonight that I should have learned a long time ago. You taught me what it means to truly give, to truly trust, and I am ashamed that it took this long for me to see it." She reached across the table and took his hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "You are a good man, Pastor. You just forgot for a little while." They sat together in that small apartment, two people from completely different worlds, connected by a moment of grace. Vincent stayed for over an hour, listening as Maggie told him about Robert, about Thomas, about the life she had lived, and the faith that sustained her. When he finally left, he felt lighter than he had in years. The next morning, Vincent went to the pawn shop on 5th Street. The same young man was behind the counter, and Vincent explained what he was looking for. The man remembered the locket, found it in the back, and quoted a price of $35. Vincent paid without hesitation and drove straight to Maggie's apartment. When she opened the door and saw the locket in his hand, she collapsed into tears. He helped her to the chair, fastened the chain around her neck, and watched as she touched the gold with reverent fingers. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you." Vincent spent the rest of that week in deep reflection. He cancelled his speaking engagements, postponed meetings, and spent hours alone in prayer. The encounter with Maggie had shaken something loose inside him, something he had buried beneath years of ambition and performance. He began to see his ministry differently, not as a platform for success, but as a calling to serve. On Thursday afternoon, he received a call from Barbara. "Pastor, I wanted to thank you for visiting Maggie. She told me what you did. It meant the world to her." Vincent swallowed hard. "Barbara, I need to ask you something. How many others are there? People like Maggie struggling in silence while we build our media centers and expansion wings." There was a long pause. "More than you know, Pastor. More than any of us want to admit." That night, Vincent sat down with Diane and told her everything. She listened quietly, her expression shifting from confusion to understanding to something that looked like relief. "I have been worried about you," she admitted. "About us. We have been so focused on appearances, on success, that I think we lost sight of why we started this in the first place." Vincent took her hand. "I want to make changes. Real changes. Not just to feel better about myself, but because it is the right thing to do. Will you support me?" She smiled, tears in her eyes. "I will, always." That Sunday, Vincent stood at the pulpit and did something he had never done before. He confessed. He told the congregation about Maggie, about her $2, about the locket, about his own blindness. His voice shook, and more than once he had to stop and collect himself. "I have been preaching prosperity," he said, "but I forgot the heart of the gospel. I forgot that Jesus praised the widow who gave 2 coins, not because of the amount, but because it was all she had. I forgot that true generosity is not measured in dollars, but in sacrifice. And I am sorry." The sanctuary was silent. Some people wept. Others sat in stunned stillness. Maggie, sitting in her usual spot in the back row, closed her eyes and prayed. Vincent continued. "Starting today, we are making changes. The building expansion is being put on hold indefinitely. The funds we have raised will be redirected to a new benevolence ministry, focused on helping those in our community who are struggling. We will be reaching out to the elderly, the widows, the single parents, the forgotten, because that is what the church is supposed to do. That is who we are supposed to be." There was a moment of uncertainty, and then someone in the third row stood and began to applaud. Others joined, and soon the entire congregation was on their feet, clapping and crying and embracing one another. It was not the polished, orchestrated response Vincent was used to. It was raw and real and beautiful. After the service, people lined up to speak with Vincent. Some shared their own stories of struggle. Others offered to volunteer for the new ministry. A businessman who had been planning to donate $50,000 to the expansion fund asked if he could redirect it to the benevolence fund instead. Vincent said yes, his heart swelling with gratitude. Maggie waited until the crowd thinned, then approached slowly. Vincent saw her and immediately came down from the platform to meet her. "Mrs. Hines," he said, taking her hands in his. "Thank you. Thank you for being patient with me. Thank you for teaching me." She smiled, her eyes bright. "Pastor, you have a good heart. It just needed a little reminder. We all do from time to time." Over the following months, the church transformed. Vincent began visiting the east side of town regularly, meeting with people like Maggie, learning their stories, understanding their struggles. He recruited a team of volunteers, and together they started programs to help with rent assistance, food distribution, medical bill support, and job placement. Maggie became a central figure in these efforts, despite her age and limited resources. She knew everyone in her neighborhood, knew their needs, knew who was too proud to ask for help. She became the bridge between the church and the community, introducing Vincent and his team to families who had never set foot in a church like his. One afternoon, while visiting a family in Maggie's building, Vincent met a young mother named Carmen. She was 26 years old with 3 children under the age of 7, working 2 jobs to make ends meet. Her apartment was even smaller than Maggie's, and the children slept on a single mattress on the floor. Carmen was hesitant at first, wary of strangers offering help, but Maggie vouched for Vincent, and slowly Carmen opened up. She told him about her abusive ex-husband, the restraining order, the fear that never quite went away. She told him about the medical bills from her youngest son's asthma, the car that broke down and could not be fixed, the eviction notice she had received just that morning. Vincent listened, his heart breaking. Then he asked, "What do you need most right now?" Carmen looked at him like he had asked an impossible question. "I need everything," she said quietly. But if I could just have a little time, a little breathing room, maybe I could figure it out. Vincent made some calls. Within 2 days, the church had paid Carmen's back rent and covered the next 3 months. They arranged for a donated car, older but reliable, to be repaired and given to her. They enrolled her children in the church's new after-school program, which provided meals and tutoring, and they connected Carmen with a counselor who specialized in trauma and domestic violence. When Vincent told Carmen what they had arranged, she broke down sobbing. "Why?" she kept asking. "Why would you do this for me? You do not even know me." "Because someone did it for me once," Vincent said, though he was not sure that was entirely true. "Or maybe because someone should have, and I want to be the person who does it now." Stories like Carmen's multiplied. The benevolence ministry grew from a small fund to a major operation, supported by donations from church members who had been waiting for something real to invest in. Vincent's sermons changed too. He still preached about faith and hope, but now he grounded them in action and service. He talked less about prosperity and more about justice, less about blessings and more about sacrifice. Not everyone was happy with the changes. Some of the wealthier members left, uncomfortable with the new direction. A few complained that the church was becoming too political, too focused on social issues. Vincent felt each departure like a small wound, but he also felt a deeper conviction that this was the right path. One Sunday, 6 months after his encounter with Maggie, Vincent received a letter. It was from a man named Daniel, who had attended the church once several years ago and never returned. He wrote about how he had been homeless at the time, desperate and broken, and had come to the church hoping for help. Vincent did not remember him, which was part of the point. Daniel had been turned away by one of the ushers, told that the church had no programs for transients, and directed to a shelter across town. "I never forgot that," Daniel wrote. "It confirmed everything I believed about churches like yours. They were for the clean, the successful, the people who already had it together. Not for people like me. But I heard about what you are doing now, and I wanted you to know that it matters. I wanted you to know that there are people like me, people you will never meet, who hear these stories and think, maybe there is hope after all. So thank you. And tell Mrs. Hines thank you too. She is the real hero in all of this." Vincent read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down his face. He showed it to Maggie the next time he saw her, and she nodded slowly as if she had always known. "This is what it is all about," she said. "Not the buildings or the programs or even the money. It is about showing people they matter, that they are seen, that they are loved." As the first anniversary of Vincent's transformation approached, the church planned a special service to celebrate what had been accomplished. Over 300 families had been helped through the benevolence ministry. Dozens of volunteers had been trained and deployed. Partnerships had been formed with local schools, hospitals, and community organizations. The church was smaller now, but it was alive in a way it had never been before. Vincent asked Maggie if she would speak at the service, to share her story and the impact it had made. She was reluctant at first, insisting she was not a public speaker, that her story was not special, but Vincent persisted, and finally she agreed. On the day of the service, the sanctuary was full. Many of the people in attendance were faces Vincent had come to know over the past year, faces that had never been in this building before. Carmen was there with her 3 children, now thriving in school. Daniel, the man who had written the letter, sat in the 5th row, clean-shaven and sober, working a steady job for the first time in years. Dozens of others filled the pews, each with their own story of transformation. When Maggie stood to speak, the room fell silent. She walked slowly to the podium, her hands shaking slightly, and looked out at the crowd. For a moment, she seemed overwhelmed, and Vincent thought she might not be able to continue. But then, she took a deep breath and began. "My name is Margaret Hines, and I am nobody special. I am just an old woman who has made a lot of mistakes and lost a lot of people. But I am here today because I believe in grace. Not the kind of grace that is easy or comfortable, but the kind that changes you from the inside out." She paused, her voice steady now. "A year ago, I gave $2 to this church. It was all I had, and I gave it because I believed that God sees the heart, not the wallet. I did not know that anyone else saw it. I certainly did not know it would lead to all of this. But Pastor Vincent saw it, and he chose to do something about it. He chose to change. And that choice changed everything. The congregation listened, rapt. Maggie continued, "I have learned that we are not defined by our worst moments, but by what we do after them." Pastor Vincent had a choice. He could have defended himself, justified his words, moved on. But he did not. He came to my home, he listened to my story. He gave me back something I thought was lost forever. And then he went further. He looked around and saw all the others like me, all the people who were hurting and alone, and he decided to do something about it. She looked directly at Vincent, her eyes shining. That is the kind of faith that matters, not the kind that talks about blessings, but the kind that becomes a blessing. Not the kind that builds bigger buildings, but the kind that builds bigger hearts. When she finished, there was not a dry eye in the sanctuary. People stood and applauded, not for the spectacle, but for the truth. Vincent embraced Maggie, and they stood together at the front of the church, two unlikely partners in a story of redemption. In the months that followed, the ripple effects continued. Other churches in the city began reaching out, asking how they could start similar ministries. Vincent and his team shared everything they had learned, holding training sessions and offering resources. The movement grew beyond what any of them had imagined. Maggie lived to see much of it, though her health began to decline in her 82nd year. Vincent visited her often, sometimes bringing Carmen and her children, sometimes bringing other families she had helped. They would sit in her small apartment drinking tea and sharing stories, and Maggie would smile, content in the knowledge that her life had meant something. On a quiet Tuesday morning in early spring, Maggie passed away peacefully in her sleep. The locket was around her neck, just as it had been every day since Vincent returned it to her. When Vincent received the news, he sat down at his desk and wept, not from sadness alone, but from gratitude. Gratitude for the lessons she had taught him, for the grace she had shown him, for the life she had lived. The funeral was held at the church, and over 600 people attended. They came from all corners of the city, from all walks of life, united by the woman who had touched them all. Vincent delivered the eulogy, his voice strong and clear. Maggie Hines was a woman of faith, he said, not the kind of faith that seeks reward, but the kind that gives without counting the cost. She taught me that true wealth is not measured in what we accumulate, but in what we are willing to sacrifice. She taught me that the smallest gifts, given with the biggest hearts, echo the loudest in eternity. He paused, looking out at the sea of faces. Maggie gave $2 to this church, $2 that changed my life and the lives of countless others, not because of the amount, but because of what it represented. Sacrifice, trust, love, and that is her legacy, not in buildings or programs, but in the hearts she transformed simply by being who she was. As they carried her casket out of the church, the sun broke through the clouds, casting light through the stained glass windows. The colors danced across the walls, and for a moment, everything felt touched by something beyond words. In the years that followed, Vincent continued the work Maggie had inspired. The benevolence ministry expanded into a full-scale non-profit, serving thousands of families across the region. Vincent wrote a book about his journey, dedicating it to Maggie, and donated all the proceeds to the fund that bore her name. But more than any program or initiative, what endured was the lesson itself, that faith is not about what we possess, but what we are willing to give, that grace is not earned but offered, that transformation is possible, even for those who think they have it all figured out. And every Sunday, in the church on Riverside and 10th, a small plaque hangs in the back row where Maggie used to sit. It reads simply, "In memory of Margaret Hines, who taught us that $2 can change the world." If you found meaning in this story, consider subscribing for more reflections on faith, sacrifice, and the moments that transform us. Leave your thoughts below and share this with someone who needs to hear it today. Until next time, remember that the smallest gifts given with the biggest hearts echo the loudest in eternity.